It's a great traffic.
Yeah, I'm looking at a shopping center as well. You can see the great stuff. So I'm walking before that It's hit or miss. You're better off doing it alone than at the schedule. Yeah. Or doing daycare. Daycare better. So daycare is not going to be
Thanks.
Yeah. Probably seems like a long time.
What else were you planning? Yeah, no, I was up in Berkshire Hathaway last weekend. Yeah.
You're not taking this class either?
It's like ladies.
Something you just said, which has to do with questions. That's all I'm trying. Because my answers aren't right either. So there's other people that
Real estate applications.
all right, great to see you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Mr.
Christian, here. Dustin Anderson.
Here.
Alexander. Daryl, I saw you. Where are you? Daryl? There you go. Brian? Antoine?
He's in the restroom. There he is.
Yo, son. I'm here, yo.
Where'd you get those shorts, dude?
I went to the beach.
He's on the beach at 6:30.
They're waiting for me.
That's Vineyard Vines, man.
Mariel? Marta? Frederick? Tyler?
Present.
Mancini? I saw you walk in. You're not in the other classes?
I am. I walked in out for a bit. I'm here.
Juan? He was here.
Yeah.
Notice the guy, he brings the Wall Street Journal, doesn't have a crease in it. But it's like, oh yeah, I read it, Professor, I read it.
Right on mine.
Chad.
Ask him what the 10-year
Say
treasury is.
Ryan. Yeah. There you are. Robert Saunders.
Here.
Sanders.
Oh.
Elissa. Irene, no Irene? Irene? Irene going once, going twice. Justin? There you are, how are you? Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be here. Got up at 5 o'clock, you know, couldn't wait. Excitement. Excitement was killing me, you know.
Me too, man.
Man, I feel you.
You feel it? It's like the most intense 7 hours of the week, man. You guys ready to get
We
it?
love it.
Let's go get it. Okay, listen. So, If you reread your syllabus before coming today, you would know that the general theme or topic of conversation today was basically dealing with costs, right? So the costs. So whether it's pre-development cost, whether it's or pre-acquisition cost, whether they are development costs, how we allocate costs, talking a little bit about job costing, and then that's sort of going to lead us into project budgeting, okay, and then we'll talk a little bit about construction draws and retention and loan draws and things like that, and all the guys that are PMs in the construction world can help us with all that. So we, in theory, should have had 2 case studies due this week, but since we weren't able to cover the topic of credit analysis last week, you'll get that for the next session. So we only have 1 case study that we'll review today. It's the one on supplementals of the financial analysis case study that you did. And we'll definitely cover credit analysis today. I think if time permits, which I think it should, I'm going to go over a little bit over operating statements. We don't really do a whole lot with that. I mean, that in theory is probably covered more in some of the other classes in the program, but I still want to cover them from an accounting perspective. And I always have a couple of ancillary topics that I have available if we ever run out of time. I mean, if we run out of material and we have time, I mean, I'll make sure you get your money's worth. So I always have extra material. So
appreciate it.
I've never been able to deliver it, but I bring it all the time, okay? So anyway, listen. So just a few things. Let's go through housekeeping, right? Order of the day, we're going to go through housekeeping. We'll talk about current events. I always like to start current events. There's a lot going on, okay? And then we'll get into credit analysis. We'll go over the case study. We'll do the lecture on the technical material, you know, blah, 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 blah. If we can turn computers off. Guys, I'll say this. Last week, while you all were in class, I was getting emails from all of you. It's just evidence and proof that if you've got electronics on, you're going to use them. And just, you're here to learn. You know, one of the things I want to pick up on something Matt said while I was in here in the back, and he said he didn't get enough questions from you guys. Well, I don't either. And I was talking to Fred outside, and he doesn't get questions either. We don't ask, we don't learn. You guys are here to learn. And, you know, just sort of rolling into, I've offered office hours. I don't know of any other instructor that does it. You don't need to come. You don't need to dial in. But the last 2 weeks, goose egg. Nobody's dialed in. Nobody. So, Maria, that's why I don't tape them. There's nothing to tape. Okay? Goose egg. Now, if the hours don't work, I understand. But email works. So when I don't get any emails, the only email I got this week was, I already completed my assignment, but I have a question. Well, luckily you did it right, you know. But so if I don't get any questions and I don't get people dialing in, my assumption is you guys are going to get hundreds on your case studies. And that wasn't the case. But we'll talk about that when we talk about the case study. Okay? So, but again, listen, I could tell you, it's not to be critical for the sakes of being critical. It's ultimately why you're here. Are you here for a piece of paper or are you here to learn? And again, learning requires effort, requires hard work. It doesn't require the path of least resistance. It doesn't require, when you've got an answer to an essay that is shorter than the question, one would wonder how much effort was put into the thought process behind that, right? So if the question was a paragraph and had 3 or 4 questions in it and your answer was 1 sentence, maybe you're missing something. And it has nothing to do with the grade. It has to do with why you're here and what you're trying to get out of the program. You will get as much out of the program as you put into it. If you put the work in, put the hard effort in, you're going to learn. You just go through the motions. You might get a piece of paper. You might put it on the wall, but, you know, what's the value of that? And, you know, listen, at the end of the day, you are your best and most important future reference. As a peer group, you will all go into the marketplace and hopefully in this industry together. So my question is going to be, you know, if you're in a group and you don't pull your weight, right, and all of a sudden, you know, Ryan's got an opening in his company, who's he going to call out to? Is he going to call you and say, is he going to call, you'll never know it. If an instructor gets a reference, is he going to think of you or not? And I can tell you candidly, there are people in this class that I would think of immediately, and there are people that I would not. Not because they're bad people, but because I don't see, you know, ultimately when you recommend someone somewhere, guess what? Whose line? You know, whose word is on the line? Right? So, and again, I'm saying I see it. I see some people putting great effort. I see some other people phoning it in. And that's not going to call anybody out. That's all on all of you. And it was, in a way, it was sad for me to hear that other instructors have the same sort of concern. I've been teaching in this program now 6+, going on 7 years. And I can tell you in the last year and a half, I've had a dearth of questions. All of a sudden it kind of started trickling. I don't know why. I used to get a lot of questions during the week. And I got 2 emails really. I got one email related to, I can't find the supplemental. Where is it? And then I got another email from the same guy saying, I still don't find it, but he knew where to find green short. No. And I got one saying, hey, I already did it, but I think I might have used the wrong supplemental, which you did. So I'm just saying that. Listen, we got another. So I'm going online. I had a suggestion to wait on this week till Wednesday to give you some time to absorb the next case study. So I'll wait till Wednesday. If you can't make it, it's okay. There's no value associated with that other than if you have a question, take advantage of your question or other people's questions. And if you don't, that's okay. You also have the opportunity to send in an email. You know, I mean, my hours may not work for you. Yes, Frederick? Okay, all right. The problem is my hours may not work with yours, right? I mean, I come home, as all of you do, tired, but I come home physically tired from practice. I can't get, you know, after, and I get up early. I was up at 5 today. I can't at 8 o'clock at night do justice, plus I'm not in the office, you know, it doesn't work, but I can answer emails. So if the contact doesn't work, send your questions when you have the time. Anyway. Yes, Robert.
Is there a possibility that when these office hours do come and you have attendees, can you post the questions that are asked, so at least we could all inhale those questions?
No, I mean,
or responses?
If in a normal academic setting, you don't have group office hours per se, right? And if you want the advantage, take advantage of it. Show up.
Yeah.
And if you can't, that's okay. Then ask. But I'm not going to tape an hour, especially the last hours, of just me sitting in my desk, working, singing when the music comes up that I like or whatever. You know, I think it's a nice thought. It's a nice thought, but just from the participation that I'm getting, I don't see the value. Now, if I start seeing questions of value, if I see a side, you know, developing interesting thoughts, then maybe I'll reconsider. Mm-hmm. But right now, I don't see the value to, you know, taping it and then posting it somewhere.
Yeah.
Another question?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you give us back the case studies when we're done, so we know can go over them? I don't know, somehow, and is there a possibility?
I used to print them, grade them. I do them on the computer now. I make my notes on it. I've got 19 students here. The comments are not as extensive as you would like. The value that you're going to get, I'm happy to sit down and show you if you've got specific questions on a particular one, and I know I've got a couple of students that want to look at their last one. I'm happy to stay here and show them to you. But the real value you're gonna get for the answer is gonna be to listen to what's discussed in class. You know what you wrote. Listen to what the suggested answers are, and take advantage of this time to bring up to say, hey, I thought that, or hey, I was thinking along this line, why is my thinking off? I think that's where you're gonna get more value than, I mean, I just can't write it. When I had 3 students in a class, when I had 5, I could do it. I spent all day Thursday grading, other than the 3 hours I was at practice. I came home from practice and I graded till 9 o'clock at night. But my level of being able to write down, when something doesn't make sense, I'll highlight something in red and I'll take note of that, but I just don't have the time. It's not humanly possible, and I apologize for that. But if you have the question, I have them with me, and I'm happy to go over those. You'll have another Wall Street Journal case study coming up, or a question this week, so just, be on the lookout for it. I think that's working out well. Just a reminder for all of you, and I don't think there's any classes this summer. I think because of the transition. Are there classes this summer?
They're offering some spring.
Okay, so there's,
Online.
he was finally able, okay. My only recommendation is if there are things available and you want to keep going to programs, register. And if you're going to take classes in the fall, register. Don't wait until 2 or 3 days before. Instructors, such as myself, and some of you know now, like to send out a note 3 weeks, 4 weeks in advance to give you a heads up on a textbook that you need to buy, give you the reading assignments for the first class. I can assure you of this. Those of you, some of you have taken the capital markets class. I think there are 6 chapters for the first class that need to be read. And it's a class that you will go through an entire textbook. If you don't read on your own, I don't have time to cover 22 chapters worth of material and lectures. I'll cover what's important, but you will miss tremendous amounts of valuable information if you do not, do your reading in advance. So make sure you register in time so the instructors know, hello, Danny, that the instructors know, that you guys are, signed up and, you're ready to go, and they start communicating with you. Okay, and you have time to buy your textbook, so you don't show up to it the first class, Antoine with it, wrapped in plastic, and, you're like, well,
Not naming any names.
that guy's like, that guy didn't read it. Okay, here's a question for the class, and this is not I had done this once before, and I know that Matt changed some things. Did you guys change a class? Did you change a weekend with him?
There was a switch.
One of them's going for like 6 hours on the one day.
We're not
We're
gonna
doing
be here.
presentations or something on the other one.
Okay, well, what I was gonna say is we have 3 weeks off after this session. If anybody has an interest, well, if the class would have an interest in taking advantage of one of those weekends and dropping the last weekend, I'm happy to do that. I've done that before. Now, with 5 students, it's easier to get people to come together. It's kind of tough with 19. So think about it, talk about it at lunch. If you guys are interested, I'm hearing no.
What are you offering?
I'm out of town.
Yeah, I'm out of town.
Yeah, and listen, there are 3 weekends. You don't have classes the next 3 weekends. I mean, you'll have some of them, but not all 3 of them. There's an open weekend there.
Yeah, Memorial Day.
Okay, if you guys want to take advantage of that and drop one of the last classes, we can do that. But if we got people out of class, it's not going to work, so.
They can take the drop of 2.5% of their grade.
You can talk about it. I'm open. I'm honestly open to it, okay? I'm open to it. Okay. Any questions on the material, technical material that we've covered in the last 2 classes? Any questions on any of the technical material that we've covered in the last 2 classes? No questions? Okay. All right. So what I want to do is I want to go through current events. And so what's the first question I always ask? Where are the 10-year treasuries?
2.15.
Sorry?
2.14.
2.15, guys. Come on, get it together.
Okay, I saw 2.15. What did they get up to this week? 222. What were they the last time we met 2 weeks ago?
1.86.
Okay. So how much of an increase is that?
A lot.
What's a lot? Pull out your calculators. Somebody tell me. I want calculators because you need to do something. 17%? First of all, let's talk, when we talk about treasuries, we talk about bond yields, we talk about basis points first. So how many basis points did we, so if we were roughly at what, 1.9? And we got up to 2.22? How many basis points did we go up?
32.
32 basis points, or people call them bips or whatever, right? Basis points. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, right? That really doesn't sound like a lot. Percentage-wise, how much is that? I only have one person, 2 people with their calculators, 3 people. Percentage-wise. Percentage-wise.
11%.
11%? 11 is probably close, just being the storekeeper, it's probably closer to like 20, right?
16.84.
Okay? 16% increase. Is it normal over a 2-week period for interest rates to go up 16%? No. I mean, that could be quite disruptive. Frederick, you had a question?
Yes, sir. How did you get the 16%?
Well, I mean, typically, the easiest way to do that is, right?
Right on.
Right on?
Right on.
Power to the people, okay? So no, it's not good. It's not good, and it's not good for the general economy. It's not good, and I'm going to get to, it's not good for the government. I'm going to get to that. So I'm going to read you an email. Forgive me. I'm going to read you an email that I have from someone that I know very closely. And I apologize. The first paragraph has a couple of political comments in it, so I apologize for those. The rest are not political in nature. But it says this is a letter to the editor of several publications, the Wall Street Journal, the Economist, the Miami Herald. Nobody published this letter, needless to say. But it says, as the president continues rushing to saddle our country with his legacy before he leaves, most recently lifting sanctions on Iran, or attempting to lift sanctions on Iran. And if you don't follow, again, politically, I don't know if you guys saw Kerry and Riyadh this week, essentially taking sides in a sectarian strife, between Shia and Sunni Muslims. I don't get it. I don't get it. Normalizing relations with tyrants in Cuba, blah, blah, blah. I wonder whether the media is aware or concerned about the most troubling inheritance that this administration is leaving us, and that is the unparalleled increase that we have in our national debt. Okay, now, the author here beats on this president, but you can go back to Bush, and you can go back to Clinton, and the other Bush, and you can go all the way back to Lyndon Johnson. You can go back to the 60s and really lay the blame on all those administrations. But when the next president assumes office in January, even under the most favorable of congressional budget office projections, our government debt will exceed. Does anybody know what the government debt will be? No, 17 today. It will be in excess of $19 trillion. Now, what does that represent? It represents approximately $60,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country, okay? And that does not cover or address unfunded liabilities for Social Security commitments, Medicaid, and other entitlement programs, okay? Now, are those important? Well, Social Security, well, I'll get to that in a second.
It's approximately a quarter of all revenue that we raise in taxes. It's just debt service.
Well, it's not a quarter. I'll get to that too. I want to get to that, but it is a significant number, and I want to come back to the implications of interest rate changes to all of us, including the government, but ultimately we're the government. During the past 8 years, the national debt will have grown by almost $8 trillion. $8 trillion. So over 8 years, we have each assumed $24,000 worth of debt. Now, everybody can opine on that, right? And we can opine about what all the political legacies of this or any other administration are, but what facts are, okay, is that the unfettered spending, right, and the spiraling federal government obligations will have a long-lasting effect on our society. And those of you who are young, you may not live here, but those of us who are younger, or those of you who are younger will feel it more directly than some of us who are older. And those of us who are older will have our children and our grandchildren ultimately be responsible for this, because as we know, debt must be repaid. Debt must be repaid. Those of you who have taken the capital markets class understand the implications, the societal implications of debt, and the differences between the rich and the poor, and the impacts of interest rates on people's ability to live, okay? This will ultimately come in the way of lost purchasing power, increased taxation, and higher borrowing costs for every future generation. So, you know, as we prepare to vet a new round of contenders, let's hope that we also focus on our fiscal imbalances and select leaders who understand the implications that this reckless borrowing will have on the future and put an end to this. So, again, needless to say, this was my letter. They did not publish this, and they will not publish this. And I took the time. I get pissed every now and then. I mean, we all have hot buttons, and the economy is not the only issue that impacts, you know, our government leaders, but it's one that touches us every day. And so, if we just want to bring back the discussion of the 16% increase over 2 weeks, at $17 trillion, which is the debt today, what does a 31 basis point increase mean to the annual interest costs to the government?
What else, 16%?
If it's $17 trillion, how much do those 32 basis points mean on an annual basis to the budget of this country? 17 times 32, and then, you know, divide the zeros or throw out zeros or whatever. I got one guy trying, I have two guys trying.
5.4 and then however many.
Well, it's 50, it's 54 billion dollars. $54 billion of increased interest costs every year. So, you know, we have a budget deficit of $500 billion. It's now $550 billion. Now, if interest rates go up to 3.5%, what is the impact of that? I'll tell you, because I calculated. It goes up to, the increase is $271 billion.
More than the discretionary budget of the United States.
Well, it's not more, but it doubles the effective interest cost to the government. Okay. Now, nobody talks about this. Nobody publishes this. No, it's like, you know.
Why not?
Because it's not politically convenient to do so.
No, because it's characteristic for this country. And
Well,
yeah.
Well, I don't want to get defensive, but it's not. This is not the only country that
No,
has that
I agree.
problem. And I don't want to talk about Argentina.
No, I
I want to
agree.
talk about governments that like
No,
default
no,
on their debt again and again and
I
again.
agree, but you understand that I became for a country with all this on the table.
Now, with that said, and I will use it.
understand,
I'm going to depersonalize it. Let me give you
No,
another.
I agree.
But, so you get a sense of, because this isn't the only country that has the issue, okay? So, yeah, I watch the one daily news I can watch every day. I watch the news from Spain every night at 8 o'clock if I see it. So, I think Thursday, the Spanish government went out and raised debt, 5-year money, at a negative interest rate. Now, this is a country with 25% unemployment, with a national debt slightly greater than ours. They're actually over 100% of GNP. We're not there yet. We'll get there, but we're not there yet, okay? And they're borrowing for free. In fact, people are paying them to hold the debt, you know? you know, curiously, I just did a comparison. Their 10-year treasuries are at 1.68%, and ours are at 2.15. What is the market saying about what the debt capacity or the risk, relative risk of this country? And our unemployment was what, 5.4%? Well, I mean, I don't think it measures all the people that have left the workforce, but 5.4%. But anyway, you know, why am I bringing all this stuff up? Because we need to be aware of it, okay? We need to be aware of it collectively. I hate to get on my pulpit, but there are implications to all of this. And at the end of the day, if the government borrows more than it spends, it only has three things that it can do. What are the three things that it can do? Well, I mean, it can default. We know some.
I know a lot.
We know some countries that do that over and over and over again. See, well, you're almost there. Okay? So you can default, but we can't default. So what can you do? You can print money.
Print.
Yeah, we don't print money in the civilized world, but we do. We don't print money technically, right? But if the Fed buys treasury debt, it's like printing money. But you could, yeah, you could turn a printing machine on. And what's the impact of printing money? So it's lost purchasing power, right?
Exactly.
Because if there are 100 bills in circulation and nothing's happened, and now you got 120 bills in circulation, each bill is worth less than the previous bill, right? Than the previous note. You know, what else can you do? You pay back debt. How do you pay back debt? Raise taxes.
Yep.
Raise taxes. Okay. And if you raise taxes, or if you sort of tax the population by increase or decrease purchasing power, what are you ultimately doing? You're taking the capacity. You're taking the capacity of the private sector away. You know. So, listen. I think it's huge. I think it's critical. To your points, Chad. At least this is what I got, and this is from the Heritage Foundation yesterday. I didn't really have time to go to the corporate budget office, but interest is approximately 7% of the current budget today. So for every, and understand the average borrowing cost of the government is a little bit less than the 10-year treasury, because they're financing a lot longer term at slightly more, and they're financing some at less. You use 10 years as I think it's like 1.7, 1.8% or something today. But as debt matures, right, if interest rates go up, they're going to have to refinance at a significantly higher rate, okay? So interest is like 7%. But curiously, Social Security, 24% of the budget. Medicare is 14%. Healthcare costs are 10%. So, I mean, now we've got 58% are sort of Social Security and health related. 16% are what's called income security. I have no idea what income security is. Food stamps, basically. And we've got 60 million people in this country, up from 20 million 10 years ago. 60 million people relying on the government to give them food. Now, I don't want to get into social commentary. I know that when the government takes incentive away from the people, we got a problem. So, you know, and I can go on, I've got living examples of that, but the minute you start giving people something, then they don't work for them. So, national security, curiously, everybody's saying, oh, national defense. How much is national defense? It's 18%. Now, it's a lot more than European countries, right? The European countries spend 3, 4, 5% of their budget on defense. What happens every time there's a problem? Who has to go in and solve it? The U.S., right? So, and, you know, ultimately, and I'm not defending whether we spend money on arms or, but, you know, it's 3.5 million people working in the armed forces in this country, directly and indirectly, plus all the defense costs. So there is a sort of multiplier effect, you know, to that cost. So, but anyway, so, you know, the biggest concerns is Medicare, healthcare, and income security are up 28, 60, and 30% over the last 10 years. So there's no problem with society dedicating the resources that it wants to whatever it wants to, but then it has an obligation to pay for it. And what we've done as a society is say, we want it, but we're going to make somebody else pay for it down the line. So Alexander, get ready. How old are you?
45.
Yeah, you wish you were 45.
I know.
Okay, so anyway, all right, so now I want to go, this is more directly related to real estate, but it's still on the same topic, okay? So this budget thing started with me like, I did like a 30-page paper like 3 years ago when I was teaching the capital markets classes. I saw the president on George Stephanopoulos one day, and he said, there is absolutely no evidence that budget deficits are having a negative impact in our economy. And I was like, are you serious? So, I went through all this stuff. Now, the follow-up to that was an analysis of, okay, so 2007, we had this huge disaster. Latter days of the Bush administration, there's no choice but to take a bunch of unprecedented steps from a government perspective. Bailouts, things that this country has historically not stood behind. Bear Stearns, Lehman, AIG, right? GMAC, we can keep going through the list, right? TARF, TALF, Freddie, Fannie, and all of the other government interventions that we had in order to prevent a meltdown of the monetary system in this country. And those of you who haven't taken the capital markets class, we can talk a little bit more about that in that class. But, so I understood that in a short period of time, there would have to be significant expenditures. But I started asking, what's happened to all this money? And I haven't finished that project, but I did want to focus on Fannie and Freddie, because this week, Fannie and Freddie announced their earnings for the last quarter. And it was an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal, of course, right, which I'm sure you all read, which said that combined, the companies have paid the U.S. government more than $230 billion worth of dividends in the last 3 years. $230 billion. Now, my question to you is both those entities were bailed out. It was bailed out through it was basically preferred stock was issued to a subsidiary or an entity created by the Treasury, and so the Treasury controls 79.9% of the stock of these two entities through this preferred vehicle. You don't need to get into the technicality, but that preferred stock has a dividend, has an interest cost associated with it, right? Now, how much, so they've paid $230 billion worth of dividends. My question to you is how much were they given by the government? Any idea? You got to dig. You got to go to their annual reports to get this, okay? So, in summary, Fannie was given $117 billion, Freddie was given $72 billion, so combined they were given $190 billion. They have now repaid $230. And this is not like a capital pref in the real estate industry. This is like a true preferred interest payment in the context of a capital structure in a company. So today, as a government, we still own essentially a $190 billion preference that needs to be taken out if these companies are ever, sold or privatized or spun off. Okay, so it's not been return of capital, it's just been an interest payment on the capital. So the government has now collected, 35, almost $40 billion more than it gave out. And if you go down the list of companies, AIG left like $30 billion, GMAC made money. My question is where are these deficits going? We don't have the crisis we had in 2007. Why do we continue spending more than we bring in? I don't get it. I don't get it. There's no answers to any of this. I'm just trying to get people riled up like me. Okay, so sorry. Sorry.
It's ridiculous.
Sir, you're about to take Social Security though.
Well, I mean,
I'm kidding.
no, but listen, so again, I'm not an expert in Social Security, but the reality is if you kind of take a look at, if you do the math on Social Security, so people that are collecting now, they've had great returns on what they paid in. And the problem is, it's not like a traditional funded retirement program. The government doesn't take our contributions for Social Security and invest them. It consumes them currently. And so there's no sort of growth to what we're contributing. So as we've had inflation, as we've increased the scope of the program, as we've increased, the reach of the program, then what happens, right? Hey, and as our population shifts, right? So now we go from, a lot of younger people to fewer and fewer older people to the other way around as the population ages, right? As our birth rate is just below 2, right? So now, yeah, we've got immigration, but all of a sudden now we've got more people collecting than people paying, right? What's going to happen? How are we going to be able to pay for that, right?
The return will be less, the amount.
Well, there might not be any,
I know.
Or, listen, and this is frightening. What did they do in Argentina last year? They privatized. So if you had like an IRA, the government took it. They took all the money.
But I had this situation when I started to work was public. The government managed all the money, yeah? Then we need to pass for private. Then the government said no more. We lose 20 years that put the money, I don't know where it is, and start again. I need to wait some years for my retirement, but I don't know how much
If there's
it will
going to be any money there.
Because they use, in operative situation, they use the money.
Well, that's what's happening, in most countries,
But
So
I think that here will happen the same if the situation will not change. Because a lot of people decided to go in the retirement to another countries where can live in a better way. Mexico, Costa Rica, there are a lot of Americans that decided to move to live in a better way. With the retirement. They
can definitely live. The dollar can go much further.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's one of the Wall Street Journal articles about a lot of Americans went to Mexico because the cost of living is cheap.
Mexico, Costa Rica, Argentina, Brazil. Brazil I don't know, but Mexico and Costa Rica, there are a lot. Mexico and Costa Rica, there are a lot.
What was it?
Panama.
What was the Mexican? It was Cinco de Mayo. It was the Mexican word of the day the other day. Tequila. I saw tequila mockingbird. Something was like stupid. It was kind of like. What was the Mexican word of the day? Chicken wing. My wife played the lottery, so chica and wings for money. Sorry, I shouldn't watch this. Okay, so anyway, listen. All right, interest rates go up. What happens to REIT stocks? What happens? Interest rates go up. What happens to REIT stocks?
Cap rates go up.
What happens to the value, the price, the market price of REIT stocks? Goes down. Why do they go down? Because they are perceived to be interest-sensitive instruments, right? Securities. So, from the NAREIT brief this week, REIT sell-off is a buying opportunity. Okay, listen. Maybe it is. I did buy more of a REIT this week because I really did think it was a buying opportunity. Always be careful with what people are selling you, okay? The fact that things are sold off doesn't mean the sell-off is over. It can still go down. And speaking of that, so who's the head of the Fed? Who is the head of the Fed in this country?
Girl, I can't remember.
A girl.
A woman.
Oh, she doesn't look. Looking at her age, I would say that she'd be very happy that you called her a girl. Janet Yellen. Okay, so did she speak this week?
Not sure.
Yes.
I can tell you haven't read the paper. You're doodling on it, but you haven't read it. You didn't even read the recipes that are in there.
This is today's paper.
I know, I already read it.
You woke up
Okay.
At 5 this morning.
Okay, so Janet Yellen did in fact speak this week. Who did she speak with?
Public.
She spoke with the public. She spoke with Christine Lagarde, who is the head of the IMF. And they were having this exchange, and during the exchange, she was asked about the relative valuation of equities and fixed income instruments. And what did she say?
Overvalued.
Oh, that was the time.
I think the specific word, it says, and I unfortunately puts the whole through it, but it says, I would highlight that equity market valuations at this point generally are quite high. The S&P went down like 25 points that day. Now, you guys heard that here first, didn't you? You heard that here in this class a few weeks ago, right? Because what did we say the S&P was trading at? 21. And what did we say historical numbers were for the broad market? 16. Okay, so let's pull out our calculators, right? What's the S&P trading at today? It's the S&P.
You got the Wall Street Journal.
Well, let's go finance section then.
Guys, 21 what? 2110?
Oh, 2116.
Okay, just call it 2110. You guys gotta know this stuff. I mean, listen, you cannot make decisions in real estate if you don't know what's happening in the capital markets. Full stop. You cannot make intelligent decisions long-term. Matt's talking about purchasing, I think, a shopping center or something in Jupiter. Don't you think he's out there saying, okay, where are interest rates gonna go? How do I finance this? What's the best source of capital? Do I fix it? Do I stay variable? I mean, you gotta be thinking about this. Okay, so if the S&P's at 2110, right? And the PE is what, 21 times? It was 2098 when I did this a couple of days ago. It's 21 something today. What is the implied earning for the S&P 500?
44,110.
Try door number 2.
100? 100.47?
Call it 100. Call it 100.
Okay.
So, Ryan,
One is ready.
100, right? 100 times 21 is 2100. So the sum of the earnings, the trailing 12 months earnings, does that ring a bell?
Yep.
That rings a bell, right? The trailing 12-month earnings. Do you see how it all comes together?
Yeah.
The trailing 12 months earning of the S&P would be $100. So you add out the 500 stocks, they made $100, okay, per share. Now, let's do some algebra. If the PE historically is 16, right, and let's assume that their earnings stay at 100, right, what should the S&P be fully valued at?
1,600.
1,600, right? And that implies a drop of how much in the S&P? 500 points. And how much is that percentage-wise? 20%? 20% roughly, give or take?
23.
What's a normal market correction?
10.
5.
10 to 20, okay? 10 to 20. So, am I predicting this?
Yes.
I'm banking on it, but I'm not predicting it because I've been wrong so far. But do I think that there's some exposure in the marketplace for some correction? Maybe not down to here, right? Maybe not down to there, right? But somewhere south of here. Now, how can you maintain this? All of a sudden the earnings expectations go up, right? You know, maybe the multiple goes down, maybe there's a way to justify it, okay? But, I've been on it, and now we got the Fed chair saying it, so I hope it comes
Bill, you
true.
know that?
No, I don't hope it comes true, but, look, we make investment decisions and business decisions based upon our expectations. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong, We buy a shopping center because we think we can turn it around. We buy a multifamily complex because we think we can raise the rent so we can increase the occupancy, right? We go long or we go short stocks or other instruments because we have a perspective on what the direction of the market is or interest rates are. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. The more background that we have in order to make a decision, hopefully the greater the certainty or the accuracy level of it. There's nothing ever guaranteed, okay? But surround yourself with facts, not with emotions. Okay? Now, facts aren't always right. The other topic we talked about the other day, which I thought was kind of interesting, that then it picked it up on a Miami Herald article last week. Miami Herald: lack of affordable housing called a crisis. We went through an example last week based on income, and affordability of mortgage. They took a slightly different tact on this, and they kind of said, hey, they looked at it more from renting, and they said the housing crisis for workers, right? So basically said, in order to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Miami-Dade County at market rates, you would need to make how much per hour? $22.50 an hour. In order to afford a 1-bedroom apartment at market rate, what do you need to make per hour? $17.50. What is the mean? So this isn't the median now. What is the mean? The mean renter wage. Okay, I don't know where this comes from, but this is what they're using. The mean renter wage is $15 an hour. So the mean renter cannot afford the mean apartment. What do restaurant cooks make? They say $11.78 an hour.
Yeah.
What do janitors and cleaners make? $9.50 an hour. What do secretaries make? 14, and maybe less, right? Because 14 is what, 28,000. Probably not all secretaries make 28,000 bucks a year, right?
Yes.
Sorry?
They make more.
No.
Dude, it depends who you work for.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you think if you're working in a factory in Medley or in Hialeah, you make 28,000 bucks as a secretary? Probably not. What do security guards make?
$8.
To 10 bucks, right? General office clerks, 12 bucks. Waiters and waitresses, 9 bucks. Food prep workers, 9 bucks. Customer service reps, 14 bucks. Retail salespeople, 10 bucks. So anyway, they just highlighted a bunch of different sort of service jobs where you say, okay, where do these people live, right? How do they live? So anyway, this is probably more geographically focused, maybe in, I don't know, maybe in Columbus, Ohio, you don't have that problem. Maybe there isn't the flight capital that's driven real estate values up. But definitely in this market, and there are other markets, San Diego, San Francisco, New York, where maybe Chicago. Chicago doesn't have a flight capital that New York or San Francisco or Miami have from different, parts of the world. So anyway.
Professor, if there's a niche in the market, like, why aren't developers attacking and
Well, when you say, okay, so curiously, I read all this mumbo jumbo, and excuse me, because I think it's a company you work for, but anyway, it was like, oh, there's a strong need here. Yeah, okay, but, if we continue to rely on income segregated housing, we're going to fail because there aren't enough resources to address those needs. Okay, the problem is the following, right? The problem is the following. You're in a development program, right? Right? You're in a development program, right, Juan?
Yes,
You're looking at developing properties, right?
yes,
Did you not call me with a proposal the other day?
yes,
Okay, not for me to invest in, but for me to review, right?
yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so, let's do a little development budget, right? Where does it start?
What do you mean, where's it start?
You got a land cost, right? And then you got what? All this A&E, right? And then you got what? Hard costs, construction costs, right? 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 And then you got what? Like a whole bunch of marketing costs, right?
Yep.
Right? And because it's a capital intensive industry, I'm already going through what we're going to cover later, so you got interest, right? Right? So when you add all this up, right? What are you expecting out of this? What are we teaching you in this class? What are you expecting? You got all this cost, right? You got all this cost, right? What are you expecting out of all this cost investment?
Get a return.
Some sort of income, right? Okay, well, we're not even at IRR. Income over cost / market value, net operating income over market value, what do we call that? Cap rate?
Irv.
We call it ERV.
Irv?
Irv Johnson.
Income revenue divided by value.
I over
Okay, right, so
R&D.
we're looking for a yield, man, okay? We're looking for a yield. We're looking for yield. So my question to you is, what can you cut here, right? If this is restricted, right? Now, the people that can pay the market can't pay the market, so your income is gonna be lower. In order to have a yield, what do you gotta do to the denominator? Gotta cut it. So, I'm not an expert at multifamily. What percentage of land is multifamily? Any idea? Any idea? Maybe you don't deal with that.
20%?
Between 20 to 30, depending on, the deal. So, let's use 30 for argument's sake. You think the guy that was selling you that land the other day was gonna take a haircut?
No.
Okay, you guys are contractors, would you take a haircut on the building? You're an engineer or an architect, are you gonna take a haircut? Because poor people need it? Probably not, right? So, there's a need. Now, this is outside my area of expertise, but this is why things like the FHA exist. That's why the Miami-Dade County Housing Authority exists. That's why Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac provide preferential interest loans to developers. That's why municipalities, through federal programs or directly through local money, provide subsidies for developers.
So the only thing that you can really control is the interest rate or the borrowing, how you borrow the money.
Well, you can't just borrow this. I mean, look, you may be able to get grants,
You can't
or
take a
ultimately,
market-
hold on, one second, let me just finish the thought, and you can, or what a lot of these programs do, right? What do they call it? Plan ocho. What's plan ocho?
When the government pays the rent.
They give you money, right? You get Plan 8, right? So the government is supplementing the income that residents can pay so that you can provide a return to a developer to incentivize them to produce it. Both you guys had comments.
Well, the taxes too, they can help with the taxes, or not?
Well, I mean, look, it depends, right? It depends on the municipality and it depends on the tax structure of an environment. If you're looking for income taxes, the reality is ideally, the developer has created a tax efficient environment and you can't say income taxes. Can you provide reductions in property taxes or franchise taxes? Maybe in certain municipalities you can, maybe you can't. This is totally outside my area of expertise. But here's an area where the government tries to step in, I think with good intention, and says, hey, how do we help this problem? Now we got a problem. How do we help it? Can we subsidize costs? Well, we can definitely work here. That's where Fannie and Freddie work, right? Loan guarantees that are provided, again, through the Housing and Urban Development Department, okay? And the Federal Finance Housing Authority, right? And Fannie and Freddie. And then also through income supplement programs for the renters. But, I mean, you ask a good question. If it were that easy, yeah, everybody would do it. But, ultimately, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Don't those
But they-
subsidies over time just exacerbate the problem and drive valuations up even higher?
They,
Since
they,
I mean, it kind of affects supply and demand.
I mean, look, Ryan, I've always, people, oh, are you a Republican or you're a Democrat? I don't know what the heck I am, I'm probably conceptually much more of a, minimalist government, if you want to call it like a libertarian or whatever. I mean, I don't know what libertarians are, but I know that when this country was started, why was this country started? I mean,
Big government.
well, it was more precise than that. There was something called, so you've heard of the Tea Party, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what, taxed enough already, right? No, that's where it comes from. But it's a play to what? The Boston Tea Party. What was the Boston Tea Party about?
So they're getting taxed for things.
Taxes, because we were paying the Englishmen,
Right.
right? So this country was founded because we didn't want to pay the Englishmen, right? And so let me jump to one of your exam questions on your 5th session today, which is, it wasn't until 1913, right, that the 26th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution gave the U.S. government the right to what? Lay and bear taxes on its people. So up until 1913, up until barely 100 years ago, for 150 years, this country existed without federal income taxes. So why am I bringing all that up? Because I think to your point, if you are going to live in a true capitalist environment, you need to lay off it.
Can you repeat
Because-
that one fact? Because I can you repeat that?
It's not for today's test.
Oh.
I said it's for the 5th session.
Oh, okay. You threw today in there at the end, and it kind of messed us up.
It's not today, it's the 5th. It's already, I already know the test questions for the 5th session. So, no, but the point is if you go back, look, it's kind of like, it's like the free trade argument, right? If we're gonna have free trade between countries, then as long as the conditions are all fair, right? As long as we have true and open borders across, then our competitiveness steps in, right? And we'll be able to allocate the resources in the most efficient and the most competitive, and we'll be rewarded for our competitive, nature, right? But what happens when all of a sudden you're competing with China, that violates intellectual property rights, right? Contaminates the environment, uses slave labor, right? Messes with exchange rates, subsidizes industry. How do you compete? Well, you wind up with a $600 billion a year trade deficit because you don't have equality of conditions, right? So you go back to the extent that the government intervenes long term, you're probably going to upset the supply and demand, paradigm. Now, and again, I'm trying to be fair and objective, right? So this doesn't sound like a quote conservative or libertarian or hands-off principle. If you're living in South Florida where you've got all this flight capital that's driving real estate values up and it's making it impossible for the guy to work, maybe the government does need to intervene somehow. I happen to like much more a one-off subsidy that puts this into into an ongoing competitive environment rather than the continual subsidy. So I'll tell you a story. A girl I graduated from university with joins Peace Corps. And a few years after, she writes an article that gets published in the alumni publication. So she goes to Ecuador to work on, in some village somewhere, and what they were working on was a water project to bring water to irrigate the fields. And I guess it rained a lot during certain parts of the year, so they were going to create a little dam, and then they would bring water down to the crops. So the first year she was there, they were riling up the whole, little rural community to get involved. They started doing it. Everybody was working, and they didn't get it done before the rainy season came. And the rainy season came and wiped away all their work. So USA brought in all these food bags, right? So she said, for 3 months, all we did was distribute the food that people had. What happened when the rainy season ended? And she said, hey, let's start working on this project again. No, bring us the bags. We don't want to work. Just bring us the bags. And that's human nature. Listen, and I see it. We have several kids, and this is a day-to-day reality. We have several kids that come to school that take advantage of essentially a voucher program that's been created in the state of Florida called Step Up for Students. Step Up for Students is a private entity. So Step Up for Students is an entity which, so if you're Corporation A, right? You make a donation of $100,000 to the Step Up Foundation. On your Florida state income tax, corporate income tax, you get a dollar for dollar deduction for your contribution to Step Up for Students. Okay? And what Step Up does is Step Up provides need-based, right? Need-based scholarships for children that leave the public school system and go to private schools. Okay? There's a program, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it's about 40,000 students in the state of Florida that take advantage of Step Up for grants Step Up for Students every year. So it's privately funded, although ultimately they are tax credits. And so there's a constitutional challenge against, this was created, there's a couple of other states that have done it. In Arizona, it was challenged by the teachers' unions, and it withheld. It's not currently being challenged in the state of Florida by teachers' unions. Why would teachers' unions oppose this?
Leaving the school system.
Yeah, so.
And they can't, I don't think you can go to Catholic schools either.
You can go to any private school, faith or non-faith based, yeah. I had a meeting this week with a developer, it was a parish finance council meeting, it was a developer, and he's on the board of a university called Ave Maria, and he's very active in Miami-Dade public school system. Do you know what it costs to run a student through the Miami-Dade County public school systems every year?
$6,500?
$14,000. $14,000. Now, why did this come up in a conversation? I'd asked our accounting people at the church to benchmark what the tuition was at our school, at our parish school, versus other Catholic schools in Dade County. And so, they're all over the place, right? So I live in Key Biscayne, and, in our school, the cost, what we charge, not our cost, but what we charge is $9,000, which is the second most expensive school in Dade County. Most of the Catholic schools, elementary and middle schools in Dade County charge, what do you think they charge? Any idea? Yeah.
12,000, 14.
No, I just told you that 9 is at the very high end.
About 4,000?
About 5 to 6. Why do you know that, Dustin?
Because I pay for my
They
son.
have a, yeah.
Where does your son go?
St. Timothy Catholic School.
St. Timothy? Okay, now, why do you think, okay, so, I'm just saying, so the school, if St. Timothy's charges $6,000, what's the cost of St. Timothy? It can't be $14,000, can it?
No.
It has to be much less. And again, I'm not trying to beat up public education, right? But for years, it's been documented that it's a lot more efficient in a private setting than a public setting. Because anytime the government does something, and I talked to the other day, I was talking to one of my classmates who works at the Dade County Public School System. And I was saying, how can you manage a school system with 325,000 people? I go, isn't it bloated? She works downtown at the main office. It's like, well, not really. Not really. And the reason we were talking is because she's getting her pension now. And, her pension, forget her pension, that's a whole other issue altogether, But anyway, where I'm going, the reason, curiously, that a lot of the Catholic schools or private schools can survive for tuition at this level is, what is the maximum grant that Step Up for Students gives? $5,600. And what's happened in at least South Florida, most inner city Catholic schools, almost 100% of the kids are funded by the Step Up for Students. Because the kids can't pay for private tuition, right? When I was at LaSalle in 1978, tuition was $350 a year. A year. A year. So for as poor as you were, your parents could come up with $300. For as poor as you are today, LaSalle's $9,000. How do you come up with $9,000? You can't. It's impossible, right? And we're not even talking about accounting yet, are we? But that's the same issue in higher education, right? So, those of you, you're at St. Timothy's, wait till they go to UF or, some. And how much is Gulliver?
25. 32.
What?
Yeah.
How much is Ransom? Pretty much there. How much is Pinecrest? How much is Carrollton? So this is even on the lower end of the spectrum, compared to,
That's a quoted rate.
Huh?
That's a quoted rate. And it's like every week, it's.
Well, so yeah, then you got it. Then it's like the field trip and all that. But so listen, when I started on all this stuff with Step Up, and the reason I came up with Step Up because what we're able to do is we're able to get a fair number of kids. I don't know, there's probably 25, 30 kids out of the 850 at LaSalle that come with Step Up, right? So since I'm always out there talking to athletes, right, a lot of these kids come from pretty humble environments. The first thing you ask them to do is to apply for Step Up. And it's not a racial thing, and it's not, because I got a Colombian kid the dad calls me this week, and he says, hey, look, we applied for Step Up. I go, great, your kid got accepted, he did great on the test. If you get accepted to Step Up, the school charges a small amount, recognizes that it doesn't, it's a family that can't really pay, so Step Up will pay the bulk of it. They'll charge everybody a little bit to make sure they're invested. And so he says to me, yeah, but I don't care about that. He goes, we live on Coral Way and 57th Avenue. And I go, yeah. And he goes, well, who's gonna pick up my kid and bring him home? Have you ever heard of Metro Day bus? And he goes, well, no, somebody's gotta come get my kid. And it was just a sense of entitlement, you know, it's like, we're gonna get tuition, oh, and then who's gonna pay for the uniforms? I said, well, look, there's always, the kids that leave always leave their uniforms for the poor kids that come behind. I'll get them uniforms. Oh, no, but we want new uniforms. So, people develop a sense of entitlement. People develop a sense of entitlement. The more you give them, the more people want.
He's playing football?
Yeah, if he comes, I don't know if he's gonna come. I told the guy, well, listen, I'll look online, but I know the 24 bus will take you all the way down to the Brickell station, and you can take the trolley from there.
Right.
I got kids that come from Homestead here because they want to come to school, you know, so, but, you know, so anyway, but listen, so, I mean, that's the problem, I think, with the more we give people, look, it's very Latin. It's very Latin. You know, when they had the Corralito in Argentina, back in, what was it, like 2001, 2002, I remember watching the news one day, and so this lady was going, no, nos han robado el dinero, and I'm like thinking, who's they? Because ultimately, who's they? You know, it was the government, and who's the government? It's the people. At the end of the day, it's the people, no?
That was by law, if you put the money in dollars, by law, they had the commitment to return the dollar. The problem was that they put the dollar in pesos and changed one day to the other. But their political thing that I was living in Argentina at that time, and during 2000, you know, will be happen that kind of things.
But what happens is that people are always looking for the government to sort out private sector problems.
But it's the same like in education. In education, is the problem is the same thing, because it's cheaper that the government will give to the private school money than to sustain in the public school the child. This is I was working in my expertise is management in education. And the government decided many years ago to subsidize a private school, some, not all, you need to qualify, because the money, there are so many steps in the public school that intervene a lot of people, that the money who came especially to deliver the service is too much.
Listen,
It's
back
the
to
same, it's the same.
It's the same everywhere. But
It's the same.
Here's the problem. You know how many of the $14,000 that it costs in Dade County? Do you know what percentage of employees in the public Dade County?
Exactly.
What percentage of the employees actually work in the classroom? It's like less than 40%. So you got 60% of the people managing 320 some odd. So you create these huge bureaucracies. Anytime the government gets involved, you know, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, I'd be leery. Anyway, listen, enough of that stuff. Retailers, here's a good one. Retailers boost plan to add stores. And that just sort of seems to be crazy compared to what we think is happening with, you know, internet, you know, commerce and, you know, some of what we're seeing, including one of the ones I'm going to mention now here, which is, you know, the Target bankruptcy in Canada. So Target bankrupted its subsidiary. Its subsidiary in Canada, ultimately to invalidate all the leases. So that's what this article was all about. Okay. Here's another curious one. Some Brazilian retail centers struggle to fill stores. So the developers in Brazil have built more than 130 retail centers since 2010, adding more than 40 million square feet.
Brazil is the next Greece.
Yeah, and most of them are sitting vacant.
But they
So-
are the prices right now.
Well, but the problem is the problem goes back to a lot of times things are developed because credit is available, but the demand isn't necessarily there.
Yeah.
And we saw that here. I mean, we saw that here with residential, right?
Yeah.
Now here's an interesting one. I won't spend a lot of time on it. Fitch. Who's Fitch? Fitch.
Credit rating agency.
So it's a credit rating agency. We'll talk about credit rating agencies in the capital markets class a little bit. But in addition to that, they provide other sorts of, you know, advisory services, okay? So Fitch says that we could see as many as 40 privatizations of REITs. So REITs are, we're talking about public REITs here, so how many public REITs are there roughly? No idea. 200 and, 200, 210, 220, I don't know, it changes every day, but 200. So it's as many as 40. Now, why would a company go public? Why would a company go public? Let's start with that one. Why would a company go public?
Raise capital.
To raise capital. Really?
To get rich.
Okay, so we got two answers here. We got to get, for somebody to get rich or to raise capital, right? Okay, so probably a little bit of both, but surprisingly, it's something like 95% companies, and REITs are an anomaly to this, okay? But something like 95% of companies that go public will never do another issuance after their initial public offering. So while one would think that the fact that you are public gives you access to the equity markets, most companies do not raise equity beyond their initial public offering. Which would lead people to believe that yes, there is in fact a raising capital component, right? But for the most part, it's to provide liquidity to primary shareholders. So we'll talk about primary and secondary and all that. But so if a company goes public, right, to get rich, raise capital, but to provide liquidity, there's also another expectation, which is that public valuations should be higher or lower than private valuations.
Higher.
Why?
Because of the sheer number of shares.
Because the number of shares, because of information. How about because of liquidity maybe, right? So if I'm partners with Dustin and we own a company and I want out, who's going to buy it? In fact, we probably have an agreement that the only guy that can buy it is him. There isn't a market. If I own stock in Exxon, how many hundreds of millions of other shares are traded, and how many hundreds of thousands of other, investors are there interested in it? Plus, just to mention the fact you got a market maker that's going to, guarantee the liquidity. So there's going to be somebody out there that will buy your share. Okay, so, but because primarily liquidity, okay, the underlying expectation is that public valuations should theoretically be higher than private valuations. Now, what's the implication of 40 companies going private, going the other way around?
They're losing liquidity.
That perhaps valuations in the public realm are not as high as in the private realm, right? And that's always, we'll talk about it a little bit more in the capital markets class, but it's always a kind of, am I better off in the private arena or the public arena? So what's got a higher return profile, private equity or public equity, right? And we'll talk about that. And just to get an idea, the lion's share of equity in the real estate realm is private or public?
Private.
Private. Okay, so maybe it's losing its luster. So whatever. I mean, we've also had a fair number of new REITs come out in the last few years. Do you guys find these things interesting or not?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or do you guys want to talk about costs for development?
Both.
That is part of the cost.
So I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So it's your belief that 2 weeks ago I had a strong argument with 4 other colleagues about interest rates and the effect on potentially next year and over the next 12 or 6 months in real estate. We look at the treasury, we discuss about the effect, what's going on, and what you wrote. What is your expectation in terms of the probability of the interest rate going high? 12, 24, 6?
Well, I've been wrong for 4 years, so you're asking the wrong person. So the question is who or what determines interest rate movements, right? And there's a lot of answers for that. None of them, but there's no textbook answer that's always going to be correct, okay? So if the presumption is that the governments, that the central banks control interest rates, and there's an argument for that, I think you'll see in the capital markets class that's not totally accurate, but I think they are a major component of the pressures that come on interest rates, okay? Because just to begin with, how much of publicly available credit does the government consume? A significant amount, right? If in fact we were to believe that the central banks control interest rate or determine interest rate policy, my answer would be that interest rates will not go up very significantly or very rapidly for a relatively mid-period of time. And if for no other reason, the one that we discussed before, governments can't afford, no government in the civilized world today can afford interest rates going up. We've got precarious budgets. What's the impact of increased borrowing costs? It's catastrophic.
Yes.
So no central bank is going to raise rates rapidly. Now, so again, let's not get into monetary policy right now. We can talk about this a lot, but I think the presumption is an interest rate increase is like a tax increase, right? Ultimately, you are sapping money out of borrowers, right, and putting it into lenders' hands, right? So who tend to be the lenders? The richer people. Who tend to be the borrowers? The poor people, right? The young. I mean, there's a whole implication on or discussion on all of that. But if the presumption is that all these consumers, if all of these businesses are going to be hit by a tax, an interest rate increase is going to have what effect on an economy, at least short term, some sort of dampening effect, right? So, yeah, from that perspective, there is no interest whatsoever from, the central bank in increasing rates. But if they start seeing pricing pressures, right? If you start seeing people competing for employees, rates, wages going up, inflation going up, they may perceive that the economy is too hot, and they have no choice but to try to push rates up to slow, right, put a drag on the economy, okay? Now, so I think unequivocally, if we believe that the government sets the interest rates, I don't personally see, so if we're 215, I don't know, maybe we could be within a 24-month period, if it were up to the government, no more than 3 to 3.25. And that's a huge increase already. In Treasury, I'm using that that's huge, but I could see that happening, okay? If in fact the perception is the economy's growing. Now, let's say the government's not in charge. So the government's not in charge. So we truly believe that, what is it called? The it'll come to me in a second. So the theory that ultimately supports that money is subject to, or interest rates are subject to the supply and demand, paradigm, right? So the question is where are interest rates going to be? On the one hand, people never want to bid up. Consumers never want to bid up, right? Interest rates. But if we have economic expansion, there's going to be more demand. More demand is going to do what? Push rates up a little bit, right? But what's happening here with risk and the perception of risk and what savers are doing with their money? What did investors in Spain do on Thursday? They bought debt at what?
Negative.
Essentially a discount, right?
Paid.
They're paying for a government, to use their money because there's an aversion to risk. Okay? Where am I going with all this? Where I'm going with all this is logic tells me intuitively that interest rates have to go up. They have to go up. Real rates of return let's not get into Fisher's Law, right, but sort of, nominal interest rates equal, Justin, you took the class, what do nominal interest rates equal? Real interest rates plus what?
Risk-free.
Inflation,
Yes.
right? So nominal interest rates, what we quote, are comprised of a real interest rate plus inflation, a loss of purchasing power for when we get that money back, right? And historically, well, it's kind of hard to pin down, but in the long term, a realistic interest rate on inflation adjusted over long periods of time is 3%. So nominally speaking, it's 3 plus whatever inflation is. What's inflation typically in this country? 2.5 to 3%, right? So in a normalized environment, I would argue that we probably need to somehow, at some point, get up into that range. That doesn't mean in a year. That doesn't mean in 2, right? If we get here in 2 years, it sets a huge stop on the economy. I mean, it'll just, send everything to bits. But in the longer term, if you look at historical trends, we got to get ourselves back up into this environment at some point. Because ultimately, money needs to be compensated. Otherwise, why would you ever save, right?
There's a lot of liquidity right now and a lot of cash in the market. It's amazing.
And what are people doing with it? There are people, and again, I'm looking globally because money's a global issue, right?
Yes.
What are people doing with it? What's the boom? The boom is the 10-year government treasury in Germany. What's that trading at? Spain was 168. Does anybody know where the boom is? 130 something, right? So people are willing to accept. Here's a lot of liquidity, but people are risk averse.
Yeah.
And in fact, so they're putting the money, in non-risk environments, right? Non-risk into government debts. They're financing, thankfully, right? They're financing all of these government budget deficits, right? That are happening. And people are willing to settle for low sums of money. Otherwise, the government budget deficits would be even worse. So I don't have an answer. I mean, I just talked in circles. But
I got it.
my point is, they have to go up. They probably need to go up into somewhere around there. It might take 10 years to get there. It might take 20 years to get there. And my sense would be, I wouldn't be shocked if we get up to 3, 3.25. But I think if it were up to the government, and the government, does have a big weight in it, right? I think everybody wins if they stay low. Everybody wins. I don't know. Big governments win if they stay low. Dustin.
Why wouldn't you just, I mean, I know the banks only insure up to 250,000 or 500, whatever it is. Why wouldn't you just leave that money in the bank than pay a negative, than to pay someone?
Well,
I mean, there is a chance that the bank could go out of business, I understand, but it's so minute.
yeah, but I mean,
Why would you pay?
you're working right. So I mean, but you've got a U.S. chip on, and I gave you Spain or So if you're in Greece, right, are you going to put your money in a Greek bank? Because what's the Greek government's ability to backstop the monetary system there? Probably not very high, right? I don't know much about the Spanish banking system other than it's concentrated in 3 or 4 banks. The government may or may not have an ability to backstop it. In fact, it did when there was a crisis, and it did in part with the European Central Bank's support, okay? If you are a small time, if you want to put that context or question in, why would somebody buy a T-bill that pays nothing, right? As opposed to putting your money in the bank. Well, because you're not getting anything at the bank either, okay? And the reality is, why do people buy T-bills, and why are people, because you're thinking in consumer terms, and you're thinking in $250,000 terms, think in institutional terms, right? So now you got hundreds of millions of dollars to invest. Where are you going to put it? What are you going to split up? How many banks are there in this country? 8,000? how do you manage 8,000 certificates of deposits of $250,000 each? Right? So pragmatically, people invest in different instruments, okay? And there's a whole other, bunch of other, reasons why people would invest in different instruments, not a bank. But yeah, if you're an individual investor, you might just leave it at the bank. I met with an old teacher the other day. He came to see me because he just retired, and he's got his, Florida, whatever, pension board money or whatever. And he says, look, I got it all in a money market fund right now because I'm afraid to invest it. And I said, I feel you, I understand. Because it's all he's got, right? And if he puts it into fixed income, and we think interest rates are going to go up, what's going to happen to his principal? It's going to go down. But he's afraid to put it into stocks because of what we just talked about too. There's a lot of fear out there, especially at an individual level, okay? And there's no easy answer. I don't have the answer, I just have the questions. Sorry. Just a couple other things. Beckworth Capital announces a new crowdfunding platform for real estate. And then there was an article in the Herald this week about the Florida Senate and the House passed a bill before, the whole breakup, which is going to allow crowdfunding in the state. So, again, more of a capital markets class issue, but, ability to raise money through friends, families, the internet without having to do public filings and all that kind of stuff. So, I thought it was interesting. I'll leave you with this one. This is just a couple of things I've cut out over the years, okay? So I have nothing to this. So this is just like differences between older people and younger people, right? This is like, when I was a kid, I didn't have the internet. If you wanted to look something up, you had to go to the damn library and look it up, okay? There was no email. We actually had to write a letter, okay? Then you had to go to the street and mail it, right? You had to pay 10 cents.
There were only 2 fonts on the computer.
We didn't have computers. Okay, I love this one. Child Protective Services didn't care our parents beat us. In fact, as a matter of fact, the parents of our friends also had permission to kick our ass. Yeah. Stupid. We didn't have call waiting. If you were on the phone and somebody else called, you got a busy call, busy signal. That's just the way it was, right? There weren't cell phones either. If you left the house, that's it. There was like, you didn't have to be connected all the time or be texting all the time. You didn't have fancy caller ID either, right? When the phone rang, it could be your boss, it could be a school, it could be your parents. Bill collector. You didn't know, you had to pick up, you had to take your chances, right? You wanted to ask a girl out, you had to call her house, and there was one phone in the house, and it was in the living room, and the dad would answer it, and he wanted to know who you were. Who are you? There were no remote controls. You had to look up in the TV guide. There was no Cartoon Network. You only had cartoons on Saturday mornings. Who remembers that one?
That's when I used to watch X-Men.
That's modern. You're saying.
Guys,
I had the opportunity to sit down with Gustavo Cisneros, and with his chief of staff. Cisneros is one of the richest men in Latin America. And I asked him how Cisneros became Cisneros. What is a day in your life? How it looks like? So his chief of staff said, the first thing that he does, he never answers the phone. Never. He will never answer the phone. All his calls are in his agenda. He will call you, but that is on his schedule. Even to say hi to you because you're your friend. But to avoid answering and not knowing what to say and compromise himself and think that he's not ready for it, or answering a question, he will never answer the phone. And he said to me, that comes from when I was younger, there was no caller ID. That was just a...
No, here's another. Our parents told us to stay outside and play all day long. There were no electronics. And if you came back inside, you had to do chores. So anyway, and then, this one's kind of interesting. You can believe it or not. Nothing nothing that is general is 100% accurate, but I thought this was interesting. This comes from the FICPA monthly publication. So it talks about generations coexisting in a workplace, and it has different generations, and I'm just going to give you a little blurbs for each one. So what was called the silent generation. Silent generation was people born from 1926 to 1945. Okay, so all the way up to the end of World War II, and it says the silence absorbed the wartime virtues of patriotism, self-sacrifice, and community spirit. They were also indoctrinated in the command and control management style that made them respectful of hierarchy and authority. And I can vouch for that. I mean, that's like my parents' generation. I can vouch for that, okay? So baby boomers, okay? So baby